It's the last day, guys. I just want you to take a moment and reflect on all the goodness that you've had over the last few days. Like, I have seen nothing but smiling faces and just amazing people that I have met, and it is such a joy and privilege to be here this morning. Thank you for spending your Sunday morning with me. And, you know, if you're missing church this morning to be here, then if you want to shout an amen now and then throughout the speech, that's fine. That's fine. Just feel it. I'm good. I'm good with that. I'm good with that. Well, welcome. Today we're going to be talking about facing infertility and talking to your daughter about her fertility future. I'm Emily Pardee. I own Ready Nest Counseling in Middle Tennessee. We have currently 3 locations, and we're going to be expanding to 5. One of them is going to be in Murfreesboro here. Yay! And another one adding in Franklin, coming in August. We help individuals and couples navigate the transition, everything from conception, pregnancy, postpartum, infertility, and loss. So the whole perinatal life phase. And I'm the only certified perinatal mental health specialist in the city. One of only 2 that's also a licensed marriage and family therapist in the state of Tennessee. So it's kind of a new niche that we've carved out here. And I welcome you to explore our website as well as find us and follow us on Instagram at Ready Nest Counseling. And hopefully in the future, we're looking towards the fall to be able to have some online resources as well. And so wherever you're from, don't feel like you're going to miss out. I want you to invite you to kind of follow us and keep up with what we're doing so that you can find our resources wherever you are, whatever location you're at. So, all right, so parenthood and fertility, right? So speaking to, the audience today being parents of daughters with Turner syndrome, I will be the first to admit I'm not an expert on Turner syndrome. That's not why they called me here today. You guys know a lot more about Turner syndrome, and you're an expert on you and your family and your daughter, and I'm not. But like I said, as the owner of Ready Nest Counseling and a licensed marriage and family therapist, my specialty is infertility. And we all know that when you become a parent, one of the very normal things is someday I'm going to have the discussion, right? The talk. The birds and the bees, right? That is a normal fear and expectation as you become parents that, okay, that somewhere is on the horizon. But when you get a diagnosis such as you've received for your daughter, you have to alter that expectation to explore not only the talk of sex, but also the entire life phase of fertility, what that means for her currently, what that means for her future, and everything in between. So the problem is our culture is not set up to prepare you for that, right? You may have sat down with a genetic counselor, but you probably weren't counseled in just communication of how to navigate those feelings for yourself, those disappointments, the joys and challenges that come with parenthood in general, as well as then how to actually effectively communicate that information to your daughter. It's, again, as you can see, rarely prepared ahead of time. There's no roadmap. Nobody's handing you a book of here's the steps to make you feel good about how you're preparing your own child. And that there's a reality that the dreams that you had for your child look different. The dreams that you had for your own life and expectations may be broken as well. And so when we look at the cultural assumptions, what is our culture saying about this? What does society say about fertility? It's that everyone has the same experience, right? The narrative that we're told from a very young age all through until we become parents is someday you're going to get married, you're going to fall in love, and then if you want to, you can get pregnant easily and have a baby and live happily ever after, right? That it is natural. It happens easily, and every moment is happy, right? That's what we're fed. That's the Disney story. That's exactly what we're ill-prepared to encounter, right? Is that from a very young age, as soon as little girls are picking up baby dolls, that motherhood is equated with her femininity, right? That is part of integrated into her womanhood of who she is and what her purpose on this planet is. And so all of that should just come naturally, right? And our social media nonsense is only compounding that imagery and that notion that, again, not only does this happen just instantly, but it's easy and you should enjoy it, right? That's the myth. That's the lies that we're kind of fed. And it's been going on for so long that it just feels concrete, that there's nothing but that. And instead, one of the things that you learned very early on is that you can't actually protect your child from everything, right? That's one of the things that if you're given any kind of high-risk diagnosis in pregnancy or pre-pregnancy, is that you learn very quickly, oh my gosh, I can't protect my child from everything. I can't necessarily keep them away from all pain or all failure. And you know what? That's okay, because that also includes progress and growth, right? But we can reframe that instead as thinking about this process as early intervention, right? That because we have the knowledge of altering our expectations, and our shift in the perspective can be taken then as a gift to be handed down for her own knowledge now, her own value, her building her own story, and that continues to our future. Basically, what I'm trying to say is that there's no wrong place to start to be able to help shift the cultural narrative of how we view fertility in general. To make sure you guys know that your daughter is not alone, here's some basic infertility facts. And I hope that this is jarring, because most of the people who read them are like, oh my gosh, I did not know how rampant infertility is. Look at that. The inability to have a child affects 6.7 million women, and that's just in the U.S. alone. It affects men and women equally. So how that breaks down is essentially a third of it is female-related, a third is male-related. The remaining third is either unexplained or a combination of both. That means that 1 in 8 couples experience infertility, and 60% experience secondary infertility. So of all the infertility cases, 60% of those are what we call secondary infertility. That is following the birth of one child and then being unable to conceive after that. So there's a huge misconception that, oh, well, if you've had one pregnancy, you'll be fine, right? And so all that to say, there is a whole infertile world out there that is silent and not given a voice and not really prepared to share their narrative along the way, because we've kind of boxed everybody into this idea, right? The Disney story of happily ever after, and this is the way it should go, and this is the way it should be done. And look at all the people who aren't, right? Who aren't living in that box. So the narrative of your own life when you received that diagnosis for your child changed, right? That was never an expectation of your own, and there are legitimate, valid feelings and broken dreams, and there's a grief process along with a new normal that you've adapted to. And so the narrative of your own life when you've welcomed this child in, and by the way, that happens for every parent every time in some way or another, because the expectation that it's going to come easily and be happy forever is not just for Turner syndrome, right? I have a lot of clients in my office who have these unrealistic expectations of how fulfilling and wonderful and easy parenthood will be. And it's pretty earth-shattering when they're like, yeah, this is hard. This is really hard. Help, right? And so when your story, when your narrative and expectations have been altered, therefore, you have to change the way your daughter's story is narrated as well, right? The narrative you tell her, you teach her, and that you live out in your community has to change as well. I'm going to take a look here just for a second at what we'd call typical infertility. This is the story that, of course, most of you have known somebody. Who knows somebody who's struggled with infertility besides yourself? Or right, exactly. We all have, right? That's how common it really is. And so I want to take a look at this, not to be in the voice of, well, at least right? Nothing good comes with that. Nothing good starts with the words "at least." But with typical infertility, it's sudden, it interrupts life. The expectations have been building because of this narrative, again, of this is the way my life will go, and suddenly, the game changes, right? Typically, there's months or years to diagnose and treat. The couple then has to kind of re-examine their priorities of parenthood, of the financial cost. Commonly, this is during other stressful events as well. A lot of times in that life phase, people are moving or changing jobs. They may be living closer to family. They may be moving far away from family. And a lot of times, this is the first time a couple has undergone severe stress in their relationship. So I say that because I want to contrast that with the infertility community and how rampant it is, and silent, right? Because we haven't given a successful voice to that community, that this is not for Turner syndrome alone, right? That even if you remove Turner syndrome from your life, nobody has been guaranteed a fertile future, right? And so it's not your daughter that's broken. It's the narrative. It's the story, right? Turner syndrome did not steal away future joy, right? And we weren't guaranteed a fertile future anyway. So all of the women who may be, saying, I in my talk yesterday, it was like breaking my heart, some of the stories that y'all were willing to share of I always say, like, who are the people you want to punch in the face, right? The either well-intentioned but insensitive or rude comments that get said. And a lot of that may be regarding womanhood, motherhood, fertility, and femininity, right? And so a lot of times that journey, that narrative, we have to be able to break it down and teach others how to communicate effectively. And so with the advanced recognition, with your knowledge now of at least what you know as the fertility journey that your daughter might have, I want to break this down into 3 advantages, and these are the steps that you can integrate into your daughter's narrative. Integrating self-care now, integrating couple care as normal, and integrating options into the narrative. And this starts, by the way, and like I said, as soon as that girl can pick up a baby doll, that's where the dream begins, right? And there's a lot of pushback on, well, how old and what age, and we can talk about that. I'm going to leave ample time for questions, and so don't worry about skipping over that, because we'll definitely get to all of your questions. I'm happy to answer. But let's start with this idea that you have a gift of perspective, okay? Again, this diagnosis early on gives a different route to begin the journey of the cultural narrative now, okay? And what I mean by that is the story that you tell your daughter about the options she has and who she is and what's that mean for her and her life, that starts now. No, you can plan ahead. You can learn that perspective and change that for her and kind of blow out all these expectations that society has early on, so that she's prepared regardless of her fertility, regardless of the choices that she decides to make, that her friends have, because the friends who don't have Turner syndrome also might have infertility journeys, right? And so all of this is going to be very important to be able to tell her own story in a unique way that's going to make a difference in her community. This advanced recognition helps you take steps now. And it helps prepare the relationships, again, whether that's a marriage, a boyfriend, future relationships, but also all the circles surrounding your daughter, the friendships that she's going to build, the families that surround you, your own family, and being able to teach them a creative dialogue to be able to effectively integrate her story into this cultural narrative. So, self-care. Who knows what self-care is? Give me a couple examples of self-care. Come on now. I'm gonna wait it out. I'm a therapist. I can listen a long time. Yes. Come on, give me a self-care. Getting your nails done. Who likes to get their nails done? Yep. Exercise. Excellent. Somebody over here? Spa. Yes, absolutely. Right. Yes. What was that? Reading. Love it. Right. So guess what? Self-care begins with you, right? If we want daughters to value self-care, you better be practicing self-care, right? And teaching her that self-care isn't appointments and, just going to the doctor and maintenance or learn. It can be everything from, hey, did you drink enough water today? Right? Eating healthy, exercise, but also just, hey, how's your heart? Do you need to talk? What do you need, right? Checking in with yourself, knowing your needs, not just waiting for, well, I know I'll go to yoga when I have 3 hours to carve out, right? No, it's, hey, can I take a breath and stretch right now? Just literally stand up and take a stretch. Yeah, right? Just tiny little pebbles. We don't have to wait for these mountains of moments to be able to get the self-care that we need. We can pick up pebbles along the way. Take a breath. I want you to be able to figure out a 1 minute, a 5 minute way to self-care for yourself, to meet those needs in little ways. And that's what you can teach your daughter along the way. Right? This changes throughout her life. All these needs, of course, can be very age specific. Sometimes, when they're 3, 5 years old, the self-care is mama's attention, right? Sometimes it's getting on the floor and being able to, just play a little bit. As they grow older in the teen years, it might be quality time. It might be really carving out a shopping trip, or something like that. Or even just asking, hey, what's your favorite color now? I don't think I've asked you that since you were 3 years old, right? Yeah. And so all those little things, they sound tiny, they sound like preferences, and they are, but it empowers her to know who she is, that it matters. It's very validating for her, and that is beyond any label anybody could ever put on her, right? That she has value and her opinion matters. Self-care, not selfish, right? This is something that we are trying to debunk for women in general, right? That it's actually really necessary. And when you are going to have a fertility journey that may look different from either cultural expectation or from your friends, it's necessary. You have to have some self-care along the way. And you don't want to learn that when you're in critical need of it. Right? You want to learn that integrating really early on steps for your own self-care so that it doesn't matter what society thinks or how they label you, right? It's just too easy to get stuck in someone else's understanding of who we are. And so we have to know who we are, right? We have to know our needs. We have to know and be able to then voice who we are so that we can go and tell others what we need. So, have any of you ever heard of the love languages? Anybody familiar with 5 love languages? Great. Awesome. So there they are. It's basically just how do you feel loved and how do you express your love, right? Love is something we give and we receive. And so there's a particular way in which you tend to kind of gravitate towards extending your love. Acts of service, which is like my favorite. That's mine. I'm like, honey, do the dishes. That's the sexiest thing you could do right now, right? That's acts of service, actually doing tasks, getting stuff done. Quality time, here's the one-on-one exchange, right? This is the time to sit down with your daughter. Words of affirmation, of course, building her up, giving those positive feedback, right? We know that at least the ratio is at least about 4 positive things to downplay every 1 negative thing. I've read some statistics as high as 18, right? That's a lot of positive things to take down 1 negative thing. And by the way, that 1 negative thing doesn't have to be from you. And so when that's coming from, the internet, people at school, social media, right? We got a lot of building up to do, right? Gifts are actual physical gifts. Some people, that is their thing. I know my mama loves to just shop the sales and gather all the goodies in the bargain bin, and I'm like, thank you for all these things, right? And that's her gift. That is her love language. That's how she shows love. Physical touch, another one, really important, to be able to just, put your hand on your daughter's shoulder, to be able to, there you go, I see that arm stretch, yes, extending that invitation that you matter, you are wonderful, and I love you, and just those little touches make all the difference. So learning your daughter's love language will help her in defining her own self-care needs, right? It helps her learn about what she needs and how she's able to fulfill that, and also in the way in which she extends and gives love back. And the best way to learn that for yourself is also in your own relationships, right? Now, this particular version of 5 Love Languages is for marriages, but you can also look online. There's ones for children. There's ones for other relationships, and it really is a reciprocated process, no matter what relationship that is. Really good to kind of invest in yourself of knowing what is my love language, how do I give love naturally, and then how do I receive it. So you can really kind of meet each other in the middle and be sure that you're loving each other well. This is just a quick quote from that book, speaking to the parents, that the best way to love your children is to love your spouse, right? To do that well. That's true. The quality of your marriage affects the way in which you relate to your children. And I don't care if you're married, but you can know just like your relationship, the closest most important relationships in your life, modeling that you value that and paying attention to that if you're healthy in your closest relationships and you're treating each other with kindness, with respect and integrity, that your children are gonna see that. Your daughter is gonna notice that. And so modeling it is gonna be one of the most effective ways to be able to teach her self-care, value, and being able to know her own needs. Now, integrating couple care as normal. Okay, so couples counseling kind of gets a bad rap, right? I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist. I see a lot of high conflict couples. Boy, they're fun, right? So why do you think it is that couples counseling gets a bad rap? Well, when we look at the statistics of at what point in the relationship do you think things kind of went off the rails, right? And then the time period that lapsed until they end up in my office or on someone's couch to get help. Anybody want to take a guess of when we think there is an onset of problems, right? This is usually when they say, that's when we should have gone to counseling, right? The time lapse on average is 6 years, okay? So that's been 6 years where a couple doesn't have the tools, doesn't know how to speak to each other, doesn't know how to repair, right? And so that's a long time coming, that by the time they finally decide to get help and get counseling, sometimes it's too late. Sometimes they've already made up their mind that this is the last straw. That's why preventative counseling and therapy early on to gather the tools that you need now. That's why being here today, you are like, I'm gonna know what to do ahead of time, right? Being proactive and preventative in your relationships is the best thing that you can do, not waiting for a problem or anxiety to decide for you. And so for your own relationship, being able to prepare your daughter along the way that, hey, if you and your significant other get help early on, proactively, get the tools for good communication, treating each other with respect and kindness now, learning that even as a child, that emotional intelligence, that is going to be an investment in their future. And every relationship has conflict, right? In fact, it's something we teach regularly to couples is it isn't the avoidance or the lack of conflict, it's the ability to find resolution through and after conflict, right? So is it possible to then, as parents, prevent further hardship for your daughter's future relationships? Yes. And how do you do that? You have good relationships, right? You practice what you preach. You be able to model, okay, you know what? Things aren't as healthy as I would like them to be. Let me invest in myself, my own needs, my relationships now to be able to model that for my daughter and her future relationships, right? So couples who suffer from infertility, and again, this is not subject to just Turner syndrome. This is all the 1 in 8s. They suffer a higher divorce rate and a higher risk for postpartum depression. That's simply because there is more stressors involved, and they're not seeking help as soon as they could and as soon as they should, right? So let's avoid that. These are absolutely treatable, preventable things that we can be proactive about now, and this begins with you. And so I really want to empower you with the idea that you can start now reconstructing that fertility narrative and integrating the idea that it's a good, healthy, normal thing to reach out for help, to speak your voice, and to be able to feel empowered along the way. That you don't have to wait for any kind of conflict later, right? That this is the biggest thing of all. It's okay to make other people uncomfortable. Can you repeat that with me? It's okay to make other people what? Uncomfortable, right? That kind of sucks, right? Like, yeah, we've all made people uncomfortable, but guess what? How many times have you been uncomfortable? Yeah, absolutely. And so when you are able to speak your voice, to be able to advocate for yourself, to be able to declare your needs and what you need, and to develop your own self-care skills, you might make some people uncomfortable, right? To be able to interject your own story into the cultural narrative and say, hey, I know that you're teaching this and this and this and this about relationships or reproduction or whatever is in the classroom of emotional intelligence. But you know what? I don't see my story represented. And let me tell you my story. Let me see where my fertility journey sets in here, because you're not going to be the only one. But will you be the brave one who's able to make other people uncomfortable, to be able to interject your story into that cultural narrative so we can change that for the future, right? And so this requires integrating options into this new narrative. The misconception is that with a different narrative, you have the natural urge to kind of slant that your daughter is different. Right? That's kind of the medical perspective, is that, well, all the other girls, all the friends, all the mothers, this is their journey, and it's the Disney story. But honey, you're special. And so that's kind of how it's been handled in the past, is like drawing out the exception, right? But 1 in 8 is hardly an exception. Like that's a lot of people, right? And so instead, like I said, the reality is every story is different, right? There is, my goodness, I know, I told this story yesterday about these two friends, and just for confidentiality reasons, I call them Thelma and Louise. Is that dating myself? Anybody? So Thelma and Louise, they grew up together, and they were fed this Disney story, right? Well, Thelma went on to experience extreme endometriosis and then develop PCOS, and was unable to ever conceive naturally. She did get married, and they had struggled a lot with various surgeries and being able to try to conceive, and then ended up being able to adopt a little girl. And even that road had bumps and bruises along the way. Their first match fell through. There was a heartache, in that, and then being able to finally navigate to a successful adoption through that process. And then Louise, her best friend, no problems, had a regular period, had no idea that infertility might become part of her story, got married a little bit later in life, and then could not conceive, right? And it was unexplained, but went through about 6 or 7 IUIs, starting to attempt all the appointments for IVF, and then had a really difficult, hard conversation between her and her husband that this was too much. And so they decided to live their life child-free. And you can imagine that, okay, then which one of those is more of a woman between the two of them, right? Which one is more feminine, right? Which one is living out her best life? Yeah. And so joy was not reserved for the fertile or the childbearing, right? They are still living their best, first awesome life, but different. It busted open that box, that idea of what the cultural narrative of what a woman's life should look like, of where her purpose might come from, right? And so all that to say, the difference isn't your daughter. The difference is the story that we need to change, the story that's being told. Because she will have friends who are going to go through infertility as well. She will know people, and she will find her community, and she can be the voice of strength and resilience and change to be able to know, you know what? We have to insert ourselves so that, I hope that in 5-10 years, I don't even have to speak at events like this, because the narrative has changed so much that it is normal, that there's a freedom to being able to talk about infertility because everybody's story is represented, right? So we have to form a new narrative. You have options no matter what route is taken. And this is the key one right in the middle there is you are enough. You're enough now. You're enough in the future, right? You're worthy of whatever life you want, whether it's like Thelma and you end up, adopting, whether it's like Louise and you end up living your life child-free. And by the way, you don't have to give birth to be a mother, right? It's another definition that we need to change, that this little box of this label, again, that we are told this is the only way you fit in, isn't necessarily true. But it's our job to then kind of rewrite that story and empower our daughters to be able to say, hey, you know what? I'm worthy right now. I'm valid in all my feelings, and I'm loved. And I'm worthy of that unconditional love no matter what. And so options are freedom, right? To be able to then at a young age, and I mean 3, 4, 5, get on the ground, play with those Barbies and say, hey, Ken, I'm thinking about adoption, to be able to change the narrative slowly, integrating these options of what is surrogacy. And you can take those terms just like you would with the birds and the bees and make them age appropriate along the way, right? That you can still instill your own family values into these stories and integrate just the options of ideas that there's multiple ways to make a family, multiple ways to parenthood, and that living child-free is a very fulfilling option, right? That we don't know necessarily what our daughter will need or who she'll become, that we have a lot to learn from them, and that even our own story, our own fertile journey was different than what we thought it would be as we were growing up. And so you have a huge advantage of knowing what it's like when things feel like they're going off the rails, right? She didn't go off the rails. The rails were in the wrong directions, right? That never really existed. This perfect, idyllic, scenic route was a story, a fairy tale to begin with. And so being able to give freedom offers empowerment for your daughter early on. She won't even know it's coming because it's just going to be integrated into who she is and what the idea of how I can become a mother, or what, if I want to become a mother, what that looks like. The last thing here is to then be able to share that narrative effectively, okay? So you are helping her create a new and different story than what society and media is feeding her. And then you're going to help her comprehend it, right? We're going to create it, we're going to comprehend and understand it really well, and then we're going to convey it. That means, girl, share your heart, share your story, speak your voice. Developing that dialogue that together is going to help her with the answers to all those curious or stupid or insensitive questions and comments, right? Because again, it's okay to make other people uncomfortable, right? How many times are they going to ask like, oh, when are you going to have a baby? Well, we're infertile, Yeah, that's going to happen in your life. Well, when are you going to have another baby, right? When all these questions that people don't know how to navigate, and honestly, they are almost always very well intentioned. And so instead of being defensive and being offended, we can actually wrap our arms around that moment and decide to make it a teachable moment, to be able to communicate and say, you know what, girl, this is going to happen, and it's okay to make other people uncomfortable because you have the right to feel empowered when your heart is shared. When your story is different from their expectations, that is a beautiful, good thing, right? And so sharing the narrative involves teaching others, teaching your family, your friends, maybe even your coworkers, what to say, when to say it, and how to say it well, right? That in those moments when someone has made you uncomfortable, it's okay to be like, you know what, I'm about to make you real uncomfortable, but actually that's a hurtful way to ask that question. And let me share my story so that you can learn how to better navigate these conversations in the future, right? And, we've all probably said things that we look back on and think, oh my gosh, I think I used to say that to people, right? I lead a loss group in Nashville, and you wouldn't believe, how many people have suffered miscarriage or infant loss, and the lack of compassionate dialogue that our culture does not have, right? And these are all those at least statements. And I know you've heard these at least statements, and we've probably made these at least statements, right? At least you can get pregnant. At least you don't have to worry about morning sickness. At least, right? Blah, 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 blah. Terrible, hurtful, painful things. And really well-intentioned. But we stop the conversation there with the uncomfortability ending the conversation. And instead, I invite you to kind of get used to that, because change is not comfortable. And if we want change, we have to be able to wrap our arms around that and invite them into a conversation of your own story, of your daughter's story, teach them well, and say, you know what, this is actually a better way to say what you're trying to say. This is actually how we feel loved by you and through your words, right? And to be able to show your daughter that you can do that and ask for that, and that is valid and healthy and good. So you're going to integrate self-care now, right? You're going to model all these things for yourself, pass them on to your girl so that she knows she deserves self-care. She can take good care of herself. That is valid and healthy and wonderful. And knowing her needs then integrates couple care as normal, right? It is a healthy, normal, good thing to be able to get to read the books, to get communication skills, to go into counseling, that you don't have to wait for a crisis or anxiety to dictate when you need help. You can go ahead and learn those tools and keep them inside, right now. Get that toolbox ready. Integrating then the idea that there's options into the narrative, and then constructing that narrative right now, right? You can look back on your own story where you had your own ideas of parenthood, of motherhood. What did that look like? How did that kind of explode and get, debunked when all the myths and lies you were told, that then when reality set in, oh, this is actually what motherhood or parenthood is like. Oh, okay. We can start now teaching your daughter her own narrative and being able to create that as a reality, comprehending it, and then being able to convey it effectively. I love this quote from Maya Angelou. If you're always trying to be normal, right, you'll never know how amazing you are, how amazing you can be. And I love that, to be able to pass that idea that normal, right, isn't actually what we thought it was anyway. Right? If we're actually looking at the landscape of what is a normal fertility journey, that doesn't exist anyway. And so I really want to just empower you with the idea that it isn't Turner syndrome. It isn't your daughter that's different. It's the story that needs to become different. The story, the narrative that we need to change to be able to make a difference for all girls. And that can start with your own. All right, so I wanted to leave ample time for some Q&A here. Thank you so much for listening to me. I welcome all questions. So let me have it. Here's the time where you get to get free therapy on a Sunday morning. Yes. Speak it, girl. Yeah.
I'm wondering how to put her career choice into the narrative.
Yeah, for financial reasons, or yeah, great. So did everybody hear that integrating the idea of, there's often a high cost financially associated with a lot of the options that are given. And should that affect career choices that may change and go? There's in the options that there are, I'm sure lots of grants available. Insurance in different states varies, so we don't know where her career might take her. And in that way, it could be a huge difference, right? Of some insurance at different corporations is different of what they'll offer and what they'll cover for all fertility treatments, right? But I think being able to just listen to her heart, her skills, and empowering that, you can't go wrong, right? That the investment of the reality is money comes and goes, right? There's rich teachers, there's poor teachers, but if the quality of life that your daughter is after is going to fulfill her heart, then that is one of the best gifts you can give her, is to be able to just empower her that we aren't guaranteed a successful financial future no matter what career choice you decide, right? But being able to integrate, what you're passionate and what you like and what you can do to survive on, right? That there's typically a crossroads of your strengths and skills as well as the availability of actually being paid for what you can do, right? And so helping her just navigate that she has strengths and skills, and let's lean in towards those. And you know what? Somebody has figured out a way to make money off those skills. Let's work on that. Let's try to navigate towards that. And then the rest of it kind of tends to fall into place depending on when she needs what she needs, right? That we just won't, there's so many variables in the medical community that by the time she's ready, there could be whole new medical advances that are opening up options that we don't even know about yet. So I know that's a little difficult of a question, but I don't have a crystal ball for you either. So yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. Wow. Wow. That's remarkable. Lots of options. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. And some of them, like you said, there isn't a financial component to some of those options. So, yeah. Right. Mm-hmm. You mean like her sharing with her friends or other grown-ups? Okay, yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm. How to navigate that. Yeah. Yeah. Yep, absolutely. Absolutely. So there's a lot of... Yep. Yep. Yeah. Right. 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 That's right. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. It's a lot to navigate. So the first thing that I would want you to do is address your own self-care and grief, right? That you have, again, this is in your story. This is not how you saw raising a child, right? This wasn't part of the story that we thought we would need to know at this point, right? And so being able to literally slow down and cope and recognize, like, hey, I'm sad about that. I'm sad that I have to have this conversation with my daughter. This sucks. I wasn't supposed to have to explain estrogen to an 11-year-old, right? Nobody taught me how to do that. There's no book on that. I don't know if this is going to screw her up or make it better, or I don't know, right? So first of all, a lot of that kind of like oxygen mask first on the mama, right? To be able to just guard and protect your own heart, that this is hard and that there's a grief process for yourself first. Yeah. Yes, absolutely. Wonderful. I mean, that's incredible empathy then. And so then to be able to know, okay, you know what? These are real little people that have feelings, and they know a lot more than we think they do, right? And so I really am a believer that you can empower your daughter with more information than you think she's ready to handle, right? These are incredibly resilient girls, like amazingly, right? And the idea is that right now we're working in a system where we're assuming all her friends can have normal periods and get pregnant easily, right? And that's the part where I just want to debunk that. Again, that's in the social narrative, that's not true. 1 in 8 of her friends is going to at least suffer some kind of infertility. 1 in 4 of them will go through a miscarriage, right? That even if your daughter was healthy and had her ovaries, that we should be changing the story, right? And so being able to give, every family has their own values of when they want to explain what they want to explain, so I don't want to dictate that for you personally, but being able to empower her with, first of all, just science and knowledge, and then being able to say, hey, this varies across the board, and this is your story and where your body fits in, and a lot of your friends aren't even going to know what an ovary is. And so you're empowered with that. And then to be able to categorize some things like, I like to do the target, right? Here's our inner circle, right? This is what we know about ourselves and our story and who's safe to talk to about it, right? So mom and dad are in this, maybe some doctors, maybe some siblings or a aunt or uncle, like if you have questions about this amount of information, here's our safe zone. This is who we can turn to, and I would welcome all questions from you, right? And that can start really young. And then to be able to build that out, maybe she has a best friend. Okay, you know what? Let's bring in, your mom, your friend and her mom, and let me have a conversation with her mom, and let's go to tea and let's talk about it, And again, we'll build up these conversations in our own stress a lot worse than they do, right? And so again, if we can, instead of making it this one sit-down talk, kind of slowly integrate, almost always kids are the ones who then tangent off. Like, what's an ovary, Mom? Oh, okay. And we get all flustered and prepared, and then they're like, okay, I'm going to watch this cartoon. It's like, they're the ones that we kind of take their lead, and it's like, oh, okay, this is a lot more awkward and integrated than we think. So just be able to have some of the basic science, and then again give her a safe zone to be able to share and explore and expand that in an age appropriate way, so that she knows these are the people I can confide in, and friends, and help build those friendships, and empower her friends, the close ones, to know that information as well. And I would, again, this is kind of stepping out of your comfort zone sometimes, but talk to those friends' parents. Be able to have a friendship with 1 or 2 of those moms to be able to say, hey, how are you handling this fertility talk with your daughter? And you're going to blow their minds, because they're like, oh, well, it's just her period. It's no big deal. I'm sure she'll, we're just worried about her getting pregnant someday. It's like, no. We have to bust open that narrative. This is the opportunity we have to be able to teach our friends and community, hey, did you know your daughter might not also be able to have babies? She's not guaranteed that. And some of them may not know that until later. And I know that that is incredibly awkward, right? I can see some of you being like, yeah, I'm not going to say that. That's okay. Yeah, it's true. Gotcha. It's happening right now, right? Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And so, that narrative of, okay, this is, you do have to have that short-sighted, like, problem solving today, because feelings exist today. And we know, and no matter what, every 11-year-old can only see about an hour in front of her future, right? And so, again, that goes back to those love languages. And I know that seems contrite, but it's vital, right? Being able to say, like, okay, how does she feel valued and loved, and what does she need, and where can she turn for that, right? And being able to come together in communities like this, right, and being able to then sustain that, whether it's online or, through letters, or being able to find a community as local as you can and integrate that you're not alone, because that's the isolating factor, right? And that's what keeps people from stepping out, is being able to just see themselves somewhere else. So I commend your ability. I think you're probably doing a lot better job than you feel like you are. But it's hard work, and it's not easy no matter what. So those, again, stay short-sighted and being able to just relate to her now and then build her up, because she's more than her diagnosis, right? She's greater than the sum of her parts. And so being able to recognize all the strengths and characteristics that complete her is so much more than an ovary ever could be. Yeah. 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 My gosh. Yeah, there's those at least statements, right? Yep. Yes. Exactly. Right. Good. That's right. That's right. Yes. Yeah. So one of the key things I like to do is, first of all, we have a lot of emotions to hold here, right? That we can be grateful for our daughter and pissed off at her friends at the same time, right? We can be glad she has friends and angry that it isn't, as easy for her, right? The first thing I would say is, first and you teach your daughter this, we respond with gratitude, right? We assume they mean the best, even if they don't. We assume and keep this positive lens for her that they are insensitive because they don't know, right? And so being able to first say, thank you so much for trying to understand. Thank you so much for thinking of me. Thank you so much for, saying what asking the awkward question. And now let me tell you my story. Right? And being able to, and I mean practice it and repeat it with her, right? And I mean role play, right? Like, okay, tell me what they said. Okay, I'm going to be that person. Now let's think of something. And I literally want you to think of, this is dialogue that you are going to arm yourself. It's in your back pocket that you are going to hand to that person, right? Thank you so much for thinking of me. Actually, my story is a little bit different. And you know what? Your story might be different too. I don't know. There's lots of stories, right? And being able to do that well. I definitely think, and I've learned this over this weekend especially, is there is just a huge lack of resources of stories and books and media that are leaving our girls empty-handed. It's leaving you empty-handed, right? And so that doesn't exist unless we create it, right? To be able to sit down with your daughter and be like, you know what, here's what we're going to come up with. We're going to come up with something that makes you feel good and confident in response, and then walk away, right? So I know that is, it's hard because it hasn't been developed, but by gosh darn it, let's develop it, right? Like, this is a huge hole, a huge gap for your girls to be able to feel confident about who she is and her story. And those girls are getting bullied too. And that's where they're learning something. Even though they're the ones that are the bullies or the parents, we know just statistically that's coming from a place of insecurity and hurt and shame. And so the more we can teach our girls that that's not about shaming them, it's about coming from their shame. We can relieve them of any responsibility to care about those other people, that it's okay to make them uncomfortable, and be able to, again, wrap our arms into a teaching moment and empower your daughter with something that she can just have ready to say. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Wow. Hmm. Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Right. Yeah. So there's content, which is like pregnancy, right? And then there's process. And this is, what does that mean for you? Right? Here's all the hopes and fears and feelings underneath that in her head, the idea of pregnancy means something. Right? Whether that touches on, just motherhood, and she's thinking about it logistically, like, well, that's how you have babies, right? Or, no, that is womanhood. That means I'm a real grown-up female, by that time. And what does that mean for who she is and what she needs in life? Because that's the part that all of that meaning is not necessary. Like, you don't have to become a mother to feel confident as a woman. Right? And so that means something to her. And so being able to then ask her simple questions of like, well, what do you think it would feel like to be pregnant? And I don't mean like have a baby in your belly, but just like, what would that mean for you? What does that life look like? What else is happening in your life, in your head? What kind of dreams are you building, and what makes you interested in that? And tell me about that. Again, some of these hopes and fears and feelings, because that isn't reserved for people who can get pregnant, right? And so we don't know what the future holds, whether, science is going to be able to give her the ability to get pregnant or not necessarily. But if she wants to adopt or be child-free, the idea is you can live a fulfilled, beautiful life that hits on all these needs that you have, regardless of the content of what's actually happening in your life. Does that make sense? Yeah, and so we just kind of got to dig underneath. And that's hard to do with teenagers, especially. But if you just start to kind of pick at those threads of like hopes, dreams, what's that meaning there? And who are you seeing? Who inspires you? What's social media feeding her? Those kinds of things that we have to be really careful about our consumption of that, because that's constructing the idea that this is the only way you get this. And instead, it's, no, you can get this. You can get a fulfilled, beautiful, awesome life regardless of this, right? Joy and fulfillment is not preserved for those who carry a child, right? Yeah. All right. And one more if anybody's got anything else. Otherwise, I'll let you go. I got a table out front there if you want to sign up for, just leave your name and email in our guest book. I would love to stay in touch. You can grab one of my cards. I'll be here for a few minutes afterwards if you have anything you want to come up and speak to me about. I really appreciate your time. Thank you so much, and I wish you all the best. Enjoy the rest of your time here today.